So it's really significant that Adam would sing that song here, because Johnny Richards, who wrote that song, his wife Blanca was a practitioner here at our church for years, and her son Joe attended here for years, and so we sort of own them. And yeah, but you know, there's a spiritual principle involved, and you know what I'm talking about, that if you're a success, everybody knows you. They're completely responsible for your success, right? You know, your success had everything to do with them. And if you're trouble, nobody knows you. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, so thank you. Thank you so much for that. I always love that song, and I sort of feel like Blanca and her son Joe were with us and watching over us. So as we move toward Valentine's Day, people have asked about the secrets to a long, happy marriage. And it reminded me of this, that there was a woman and her husband who were sitting on the terrace looking at the sunset, and she's having a glass of wine, and they're just enjoying that sunset together. And the wife pipes up and she says, I love you so much. I don't know how I could live without you. And the husband says, is that you or the wine talking? And she says, it's me talking to the wine. I'm just saying. Who understands why some people's relationships work, right? I don't know. But I got another one for you. I'm sure I've offended 25% of you on that one, so let's see if I can get to 50% today. Let's see, here we are. So there was, and I love a joke that starts with this, a priest and a doctor and an engineer are out waiting to tee off one morning. They're behind a particularly slow group of golfers. And so the engineer fumes, what is with those guys? We must have been waiting for 15 minutes already. What's going on? And the doctor chimes in and says, I don't know, but I've never seen such an inept group of golfers. And the priest says, well, here comes the greenskeeper. Let's have a word with him. And he says, hey, George, what's wrong with that group ahead of us? They're really slow, aren't they? I mean, they're taking a really long time. The greenskeeper says, oh, yeah. He says, that's actually a group of blind firemen. And he says, and they lost their sight saving our clubhouse from a fire last year. And so we always let them play for free anytime they want to play. So the group falls silent for a moment, of course, And the priest says, well, that is just so sad. I think I'm going to say a special prayer for them tonight, and I'm going to dedicate the Mass at church on Sunday to those firemen. And the doctor said, good idea. He says, I'm going to contact my ophthalmologist colleagues and see if there's anything that can be done for them. And the engineer says, why can't they play at night? Hey, just a thought. Okay. See, people have told me again and again, it's so hard to talk about what we talk about at church. Because, it's just hard to articulate when they meet other people for brunch later, or they go home and say, so, what did you say at church today? And they can't really talk about the message, but they can almost always recount the jokes. So this morning I was going to talk about something, that Ernest Holmes wrote in a book of his, little writing called Your Invisible Power. He said that we are all in partnership with the infinite mind. And we should think of this partnership as God and company. And God is actually your and my silent partner in the business of our life. Now, this partnership cannot be dissolved, right? Because it's always been, and it will always, always remain. So, we're very big on that what you place your attention on expands. And so where you place your attention, Ernest Holmes says, that's where your company, the company of you and God, are doing business. And I think that's really interesting because where we're putting our attention, we're telling the universe to create that, to increase that, to give us more of that. So if we're focusing on all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world this week, if we're looking at what we don't have, if we're looking at what's not coming together for us, we are telling the universe to produce more of that if in fact that is what we are giving our attention to. So God's business, is always successful. And you have to know, because you are in partnership with God, there is a level within you where your business with God is always, always successful. God doesn't have any competitors. All right? That God is always operating in complete abundance and completeness and fullness. And so wherever our thought is, there, though, the company establishes a branch, like a little franchise. And so I don't know about you, but there are people that we know, of course not here today, but people we know well, who have established a little franchise, a little branch of what they don't want. Because that's what they think about, and that's what they talk about, and that's what they imagine all the time. And there are people we know who have established a little franchise of what they don't like. Because that's what they think about, and that's what they talk about, and that's what they focus on all the time. And people who have a little franchise of their past. It's like just this perfect little business all about their past and the mistakes they've made and the hurts they've had and the disappointments they've experienced. See, Ernest teaches us that the science of mind is all about the business of living. In practice, we have to claim this partnership, that I am in partnership with God, and my business is the business of life. And business, especially when God is your partner, is always good. Business is always whole, it's healthy, it's happy, it's abundant, it's filled with love. So any burdens we might have, what we're going to do is that we're going to say, that's not in my job description. Those belong to my silent partner. Those, I'm going to actually say, God, these are part of your job description here. Because God, that silent partner actually has no burdens. That silent partner actually has no problem. So if it's not on my job description, I can just say, here, you handle these. You handle these. Because the principal power and presence of God within me, what I'm saying is that this principal power and presence of God within me can absolutely handle whatever the difficulty is, whether it's a relationship difficulty. Sometimes my head goes faster than my mouth. And it's a problem. Whether it's a relationship difficulty or something with your body or something with your finances or your creative expression, our job is always to just make contact with God and remind ourselves that God within me can handle it. And if you think your problems are so special or so big that God can't handle them, you need to get a bigger God. You really do. You need to have a bigger God, cash in that little teeny weeny God that cannot handle much of anything, and get yourself a big hunkin' God, right? Because what we learn is that the life force within us is the very life of God. And so that means that what's true about God is true about you and your life, because your life is one with the life of God. So if God is a principle of abundance and a principle of love and a principle of creativity and a principle of wholeness, then those things are also true about you because you are in business with God. And so the apparent imperfections, from which we all suffer, whether it's, bodily ills or financial worries or relationship dramas or the observation of what's going on in the world around us this week, which could really lead us to be convinced that the world is just going to hell in a handbasket. These things that we suffer from, these are the result of ignorance. Now, I'm not saying that anybody is ignorant, because I know nobody here is. But we could be ignorant of how spiritual law operates. And if you're ignorant of how the law operates, it does not excuse you from it. So here's what I mean by this. So when I was a kid, we would always drag out the Christmas lights. And back then, the lights were huge. And they got really hot. And I mean, as soon as you plugged them in, your electric meter started to spin like crazy, There weren't like these cool little lights that use no electricity, or the LED ones of today. And my father would always say, as we took out the broken lights from last year, he'd say, whatever you do, don't put your finger in the socket, because you'll get zapped. And I always had to. I just had to. Because from year to year, I didn't believe that was really true. I think these things were in a box all year in the basement. How could there possibly, electricity's not going to zap me. So I'd take out, a burned out bulb, and when my dad wasn't looking, I'd plug my finger into that little socket and go, ah, My hair would go up, and stuff. And he'd say, I told you not to stick your finger in there, but you just had to, didn't you? And you can't believe it until you can believe it. And that's just the way it is. And the next year I would do the same thing. It took me probably 5 or 6 years. I was quite a slow learner on that one. Because you're ignorant of the law, it doesn't excuse you from its effects. And so the power that binds us is also the power that frees us, which I think is the most extraordinary thing. And how I learned that this is so is that I knew that there was something to this when I understood that if I could make a great mess in my life, I mean like a really big mess of my life, if I could do that, I could probably also make a life really worth living if I just learned how to work with it in the completely opposite way that I was doing. Because I thought, wow, I have made such a big mess here. I am really powerful. Only a really powerful person could make this much of a mess of their life. So if I could learn how to work with that power intelligently, in other words, how to put a bulb in the socket rather than my finger, then I could actually really do some good and make some progress here. So consider this, that God within you is all about unity and love and oneness, never separation or duality. And so this unity and love and oneness, this is changeless. And it's always trying to reveal more of itself to each of us. Now, I think that everybody worships a slightly different God. I think everybody on the face of the earth worships a different God, and it's the God that we believe in. Now, I think there's nothing wrong with this, since the God we believe in is some part of the actual even bigger God that is. We say, well, why are there so many paths to God? And it's like, well, because God's the only place to go. So there's just lots of different ways up the mountain. And say, well, do all religions teach the truth? And it's like, well, I think everybody teaches a piece of it. I think everybody's got a piece of it. Ernest Holmes used to say, I want to be for something and against nothing. And I think that's the way to go for me, that I want to be for something. I'm for the love of God that's in every religion. I'm for the truth that sets people free in every religion. I'm for like brotherly love and forgiveness and all of that good stuff that I think some threads show up in every religion. And all the other stuff, I can take it or leave it. Mostly leave it, to tell you the truth, So whatever God you believe in, provided you believe that this God is already within you, must respond to you at the level of your belief. Because this is how it works. This is why it's done unto you as you believe. If you believe God is outside of you, how are you going to reach this God if there's a God outside of you? Text? Tweet? A God outside of you who is not part of you, who is separate from you, that's just, then we have no hope, we have no prayer. So the scriptures say the highest God and the innermost God is one God. So, when we think in terms of the things that seem to limit us, that limitation is not a thing of itself. If limitation were a real thing, we couldn't have a possibility of changing it. But we can use our mental capacity, even our imagination, to enlarge our experience, because the life principle within us responds to a broader outline, a bigger vision, right? So we have to open our own thinking up of what's possible. I have to believe that there is a greater possibility than I have seen thus far, that there's always, always more of God, more of good, more of love to be revealed. So Ernest teaches this. He says that whatever you mentally see, and spiritually comprehend, you can objectively experience. So this means, I think, bringing not just our physical eyes, because sometimes we can't see with our physical eyes. He's talking about using your inner eye, using a divine eyesight to see something greater. When you need to have a physical healing, if you look just with your physical eyes, what you're going to see is a sick person, right? So you have to look with an inner eye and know that beyond this, there is a perfect, healthy, whole me. And that's what I'm going to focus on. If you don't have work, you can't just look with an outer eye at your situation, because you'll just be depressed and never want to get off the sofa. You know, you have to look with an inner eye and say, I know that there is a divine me, you know, and that divine me has perfect work for perfect pay right now. You know? So remember, the God in us cannot be limited by any experience. You know, because God in us is actually the creator of all experience, and we are in relationship, we are in business with this creator. You know, the scriptures say, let the mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. So this mind you possess is the mind which Jesus used to demonstrate the Christ principle. So, you know, Ernest Holmes and Emma Curtis Hopkins and Mary Baker Eddy and all of the New Thought founders, what they did was that they had an awareness that changed the course of the consciousness of humanity. Because Ernest Holmes says in the Science of Mind textbook, in the chapter on finding the Christ, he says that Jesus Christ is the great example, not the great exception. Up until New Thought, everyone else was saying that Jesus is the exception, that there was something special about him, and you never had it, and you never will, you know, so just forget it. And it's like, well, great, thanks. You know, but what Ernest and Emma and Mary Baker Eddy, what all these people did is they said, no, 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 no. Jesus is the great example that what he had, you also have. The difference is he didn't have the other stuff. You know, that the difference is he knew it and acted from it, and we know it and act from it sometimes, you know, for a moment or in an instant or for just a little bit. He knew it and acted from it all the time, all the time, all the time. And that's why he's an example of what we may be, of what we are in the process of becoming. So when we realize God is at the center of our being, this is what gives power to our word. You know, because I'm just not some nobody speaking my word, that God is at the center of my being when I speak my word. And the way I speak my word is not only what comes out of my mouth, but what I see with an inner eye and what I'm thinking and what I'm holding as far as the content of my heart. All of that is the power of my word. So what we focus on in Science of Mind is that there is a place within each of us that is spiritual perfection. We call it the mind of God. And that mind of God within us has no problems, no difficulties, is never confused, is never lacking. You know, and so that's a principle within us, you know, within our body of affairs. It's a principle of perfection. And so, you know, your consciousness and my consciousness of the divine presence within us, you know, what this is like, when we're aware of this divine presence within us, it's like our consciousness becomes a light that dissipates the darkness. And so, you know, you watch the news and you read the newspaper and you see the news on your computer and, you know, and you could just be bombarded. You could just be bombarded, and it makes the world look like such an awful, awful place. And so, I have to stop and I have to say, wow, there's so much seeming darkness. There's so much crazy stuff going on in the world. Now, there's probably never been a generation that didn't say that. You know, when Adam and Eve finally got bounced from the garden, I'm sure they were sitting having a latte somewhere saying, my God, the world is just crazy, isn't it? You know, my grandparents said it, my great-grandparents said it, my parents said it. But the thing is that somebody has to know. Somebody has to say, you know what, I am responsible here. The light in me, the light that I put out into the world, the love that I put into the world dissolves the darkness. It's the easiest thing in the world to join in to with the insane thinking of the world. That's not difficult to do because there's enormous agreement for it everywhere, right? But then nothing will get better because of that. You know, to join in darkness with the darkness just makes more darkness. Right? But it takes some work, some effort, some degree of spiritual consciousness to say that I will be a light in the darkness. I will know that when I see the news on TV that God is in the midst of that. You know, that love is there, that healing is taking place. Doesn't look really good right now, but I have to know that God is everywhere present, and so I know God is in that situation. And when I think, what is my kid off doing right now? I have to know that divine intelligence is within them and guiding exactly what they're doing right now. You know, the apostle said, we used to see as through a glass darkly, which I think is a great image. You know, if you've ever held up like a bottle, a brown bottle or a green bottle and tried to look through it, you know, not an awful lot of clear seeing happens. You know, the greater good doesn't appear fully, only as a shadow. But you know, the principle and power and presence is universal, but we also individualize. God is universal, but also individualized. How? Through our consciousness. And so what is at the center of our being is really creative. This is why I think Ernest Holmes founded this teaching here in Southern California, in Los Angeles, that he liked and he got that this was really for people who were creative people, that creative people would really get a hold of this. Because we use the same creativeness that brings the planets into being. That's the same creativity that's flowing through us. I mean, think about that. You know, the planets are like revolving in orbits, and for the most part, not crashing into each other. That's an intelligent principle. This creativity that is so vast, you know, that flowers bloom and babies get born. There's a creativity there, and that same creativity is actually operating in us. So Ernest said to think is to create. That, you know, we have all already been thinking and creating. We have, right? We have been thinking and we have been creating up until now. We live in a world of our creation. That doesn't seem true, does it? We live in a world of our creation. But if it were not true, you would not be a free individual. And what I know is that spirit in each of us is absolutely free. So to think is to create is the key that opens the door to greater wisdom and power for each of us. So that doorway is already there. But to know, every time I think, I'm creating. And it's not just thinking a thought, it's what I see with my mind's eye and what I say out loud and the content of my heart. All of that is contributing. You know, and I'm either going to contribute to the light or I'm going to contribute to the darkness. So somewhere within you, the mind of God reveals this truth. That you came in, you as a being, you as a spiritual being, right here were born free. And the will of God for you is a will of goodness. And it's a will of truth and beauty and abundance and creative expression. You know, all of the power there is for you. Nothing is against you. You know, and I know so many of us have been brought up and conditioned to think that everyone and everything was against us at every step of the road. But you know, the scriptures say that the kingdom of heaven is already within you. And the law of the kingdom, the law is harmony and peace and joy. It has no opposite. There's nothing to contradict its authority. So know this, you know, with me. If you would know this, you know, you will exercise the authority which the eternal principle has incarnated within you. So you know the power within you is the power of your word. It's not so much a will as it is a willingness. You know, so we don't have to will things to happen. This is not about willpower. The science of mind is not like, all right, you get to have really strong willpower here. I'm going to make it. No, it's a willingness. We have to know that that greater good is in fact happening right now, regardless of external appearances. You know, that Ernest says in the textbook, he says, you can have whatever you become in consciousness. So how do I become something greater in consciousness? Well, part of that is what I equate my consciousness with, or what I say my consciousness is. So I say, I am the consciousness of abundance. Say that.
I am the consciousness of abundance.
Now think about this, that you, before you incarnated, your soul absolutely knew that you were the consciousness of just tremendous abundance. And then you incarnated and you kind of forgot a little bit. You kind of forgot a little bit. It's sort of back there, but it's not fully there. And so now when you say it remembering like this is an eternal truth about you. I am the consciousness of abundance.
I am the consciousness of abundance.
I am the consciousness of perfect health.
I am the consciousness of perfect health.
I am the consciousness of loving relationships.
I am the consciousness of loving relationships.
See, because if it's your consciousness, it cannot help but demonstrate out here in the world. You know, the Bible says, by your words you shall be justified, and by your words you shall be condemned. It's time for us to stop condemning ourselves by our words and finally get justified. Let's pray. So we turn our attention inward now for a moment to recognize that we are surrounded and filled with an infinite spirit of love and intelligence. And I claim for each and every one of us today that we recognize that there is an invisible power, principle, and presence within us that's always at work. We are in business with it. that God, in fact, is our silent partner. And I claim for each and every one of us in the business of life, because we are in partnership with God, business is very, very good. I know that anything that we have believed that does not serve us, any old habit or idea or way of being, it doesn't serve us anymore, we consciously release those now. We surrender them over. We recognize that they were part of the past, but they are not part of our present and certainly not part of our future. And so I claim for each and every one of us, as we are healed, and we are healed, that there is the newness of spirit in our life, a newness that is different and greater than anything that has ever gone before. So I claim for us healings and greater love. I claim for us divine insight. I claim for us creative expression and abundant livingness. I know that all of this is the will of God for each and every one. And I claim that the world we live in is a place of peace, that God is on the job in all situations that come into our mind as we think about the world today. Everything we think of, God is right there. Healing is happening. We shine the light of peace. We shine the light of prayer. We shine the light of perfect harmony into all of those situations. We include our family members and friends and loved ones. We say God is right there where they are. Whatever they're doing, whatever they're going through, we know the perfect presence is right there. We bless our church and all churches, synagogues, temples, mosques, ashrams, all paths to God. We're for something and against nothing. And so with an open, gracious, full heart, I give thanks that this is so, that this is the truth as God created it, and we step into it here and now. And so it is, and so we let it be. Together we all say, Amen.